The early summer morning of 2024 in Denton, Texas, began with a strange disturbance on Dusty Trail, a road that had been quiet for decades. Three unmarked Texas Rangers SUVs quietly pulled up in front of a small wooden house, a place the neighbors only knew for its peaceful mornings and the distant cawing of crows. Neighbors pulled their curtains shut and watched silently as agents in tactical jackets spread out to surround the house, as if preparing to enter a secret that had been locked away for a very long time. Inside, a woman nearing 70 was folding a kitchen towel, repeating a habit that had followed her for more than half her life under the name Anna Brooks, a name she never thought anyone would question. The knock came sharp and decisive at 9:14 a.m. "This is Anna Brooks. We're the Texas Rangers. We need to talk to you about a disappearance that happened in Denton in night." The agents later said her hands froze mid-air, but her face remained unnaturally calm, as if she had always known this day would find her, even if it took 64 years. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love journeys to find forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Texas, in 1960, was a place that blended the peacefulness of rural life with the slow pace of small towns, where kids still played freely on dirt roads, neighbors knew each other's faces, and summer mornings always started with the sound of an ice cream truck crawling slowly through the streets. In the town of Denton, the Carter family lived in a simple but cozy wooden house. Father Henry worked at a machinery repair shop. Mother Margaret stayed home with the kids, and their two children, 12-year-old Sam and 5-year-old Emma, were always together. Sam was a quiet boy who liked to observe, while Emma was quick, lively, and always trailing after her big brother in every game. That morning, the dry, hot Texas weather had the kids out in the front yard earlier than usual. Sam sat in the shade of an oak tree whittling with his pocket knife, while Emma ran circles around the yard with her old cloth doll. Everything seemed normal until a light blue Ford F-100 appeared at the end of the dirt road. The truck was moving unusually slowly, as if easing off the gas the moment it reached the Carter place, then kept gliding past, leaving behind the low rumble of its engine. Sam noticed but didn't think much of it. Emma just looked at it innocently, not understanding what those details might mean. A few minutes later, while Sam was focused on the piece of wood in his hands, a strange man appeared near the fence by the gate. No one knew where he had come from. He showed up too fast and too quietly. The man stood just a few steps from the gate, watching the Carter yard like he was waiting for the exact right moment. Emma saw him first, her eyes turning toward the gate. In the single second Sam bent down to pick up something he'd dropped, Emma stepped away from where Sam was and walked toward the gate, where the man was lightly waving. It happened in less than a few seconds. Emma reached the gate, the man opened his arms, and the little girl was lifted off the ground. Sam didn't hear any scream. He only looked up in time to see Emma's tiny legs disappear behind the fence. By the time he ran to the gate, the light blue Ford F-100 had come back. The man yanked open the cab door, pushed Emma inside, and the truck sped off toward the main road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. Emma was gone. Henry and Margaret immediately ran through the neighborhood, calling her name, knocking on every door, asking anyone who had been outside at that moment. In the first 15-20 minutes, the family searched the yard, the back lawn, the small woods near the creek, and the fence line next to the neighbors' yards, but found no trace. Sam kept repeating that he had seen the blue truck drive away, his voice shaking but certain. When the family reached the end of the road, they met old Mrs. Emma Lou, who had just walked home and confirmed she had seen a light blue Ford F-100 speeding out of the neighborhood minutes earlier, heading toward Denton Highway 3. The match between Sam's and Miss Emma Lou's accounts made Henry realize this was no longer a case of a child wandering off. In a state of panic but trying to stay calm, Margaret rushed back home, picked up the phone with trembling hands, and reported the emergency missing child call to the local police. The moment Margaret hung up, the dispatcher forwarded the information to the Denton County Sheriff's Office, and less than 10 minutes later, the first patrol car turned into the neighborhood. The Denton County Sheriff, who had served nearly 20 years, stepped out of the car with a grave expression after hearing the initial description over the radio. The temperature was already climbing, the dry dirt road kicking up dust with every step, but no one paid attention to the weather. He went straight to the Carter yard, where Henry, Margaret, and Sam stood waiting in panic. The sheriff ordered everyone to preserve the scene and began collecting initial data right where Emma had last been seen. He examined the wooden gate, the lightly disturbed ground under Sam's feet, and the areas on both sides of the fence where the stranger had appeared. Every small detail was noted in his notebook: the time Emma disappeared, Sam's position, the direction the truck fled, and the estimated time from when Emma stepped out of sight until the Ford F. The sheriff had Henry and Sam recount the entire incident step by step, leaving nothing out. Despite trembling, Sam managed to describe every moment, from the truck passing slowly, to the man appearing and finally Emma being pulled into the cab. The sheriff asked detailed follow-up questions to pin down the suspect's appearance: height, clothing, walk, hair color, approximate age. Next he took a statement from Mrs. Emma Lou, the witness who saw the truck speeding away. Comparing Sam's and Miss Emma Lou's statements allowed the sheriff to establish a solid timeline. The truck appeared a few minutes before Emma was separated from Sam, lingered briefly, then turned around and fled toward the main road. This timeline helped narrow the suspect's window of action to less than 3 minutes: fast, precise, and planned. After analyzing how the statements lined up, the sheriff reached a critical conclusion: the chances of Emma simply wandering off were virtually zero. The presence of a stranger, the exact moment Emma stepped away from Sam, coinciding with the truck's return, and the vehicle's direction, all pointed to outside intervention. The sheriff officially classified the case as a suspected kidnapping, even without complete evidence. That decision changed the entire course of the investigation. He immediately requested additional units from headquarters and alerted patrols near Highway. Next he set up an initial search perimeter in 3 rings. Ring 1 within 100-300 meters of the Carter house, Ring 2 extending to lawns, the small woods, and the dry creek within about a mile, and Ring 3 along the suspect's escape route. Search teams were deployed immediately, made up of patrol officers, auxiliary deputies, and a few vetted volunteers. The sheriff clearly marked the exact spot where Emma was last seen to keep it undisturbed for later evidence analysis. Meanwhile, another officer recorded every detail about the Ford F-100, light blue, old cab, loud engine rumble, heading toward the main highway. All of it went into the initial report and was prepared for a vehicle alert bulletin to regional checkpoints. Once the timeline was reasonably clear, the sheriff activated the standard missing child protocol of the era: alerts to every patrol unit in the county, urgent reports to neighboring towns, organized search parties in every direction of travel, and immediate checks of any suspicious vehicles seen in the previous 2 hours. He also ordered an officer to compile a list of all local residents to identify anyone who might own or drive a similar truck. From the moment the call came in until the full response was ready, only about 30 minutes had passed, but every minute was critical. Sheriff Denton stayed laser-focused. He knew that if the suspect had already reached the main highway, the trail would grow colder with every mile. But at that point, with the evidence he had no choice but to run the search and evidence collection in parallel. The Carter family was told to stay in the yard and not join the search to avoid intimidating the scene. Henry tried to keep it together. Margaret stood close to the front door, eyes fixed on the road as if Emma might suddenly appear. In every missing child case, the first hours are the most crucial, and the sheriff understood that better than anyone. So as the morning sun began pouring straight into the Carter yard, the official investigation kicked off at the highest priority, marking the first step in a chain of events no one could have imagined would stretch across decades. The tense atmosphere still hung over the Carter yard when Sheriff Denton shifted focus to a thorough sweep of the gate area and the dirt road out front. The dry, dusty ground preserved some undisturbed traces, so he started right where Sam had last seen Emma. The wooden gate was examined first. No scratches on the surface, the latch hadn't been forced, the hinges were straight. The approach had been silent and extremely quick, which matched Sam's statement that he heard no crash or unusual noise. The sheriff stepped back a few paces to take in the whole yard. Most of the area near the porch had already been trampled by the family and neighbors during the initial search, but the strip along the road still had untouched dust layers. There, a tire track about a meter long appeared, faint but continuous, enough to make a preliminary vehicle identification. The width of the grooves, the distance between the 2 tracks, and the estimated contact patch all pointed to an older light-duty pickup, and the specs matched the Ford F-100. Though the tread pattern wasn't clear, the track showed the truck had pulled close to the curb, stopped briefly, then accelerated away. The direction was determined by the compression of the dry soil and the slight drift of the grooves. The vehicle never turned into the neighborhood but sped straight out toward the main road. Near the fence, a small depression in the dirt stood out like an adult footprint, where someone had stood still for a few seconds. It faced directly toward the wooden gate, and the distance just a few steps showed the man had chosen a spot from which he could reach Emma without opening the gate wide. Nearby were 2 shoe prints, with small square heels, completely different from Henry's or Sam's shoe. The large size and spacing on the hard, dry surface indicated a man of average or above average height, who walked decisively, not elderly or weak. This detail reinforced the idea that the suspect had no trouble lifting a 5-year-old child out of the yard. The sheriff compared the shoe size to common models of the time and noted a size 10 or 11, typical for a man between roughly. The location of the prints right at the fence edge also ruled out the possibility that Emma had walked out on her own. If she had opened the gate or gone another way, there would certainly have been small child footprints leading away. The evidence team scoured the entire yard edge and side paths, but found no child-sized prints matching Emma's feet. There were no drag marks or scuff marks, meaning Emma had been carried cleanly with no strong struggle. These findings led to a crucial elimination. Emma did not leave the yard on her own, did not wander into the woods behind the house, or head to the western lawn. Every direction a child might naturally go showed no matching trace. The fact that the suspect stopped in an ideal spot, approached from the main road and moved in perfect sync with the witness statements made the investigation direction clear. Based on the tire track position, the most logical escape route was the dirt road leading to the highway, where the Ford F-100 could accelerate out of the neighborhood without drawing further attention. The sheriff used a hand-drawn map of the area to mark every key point where the truck stopped, where the suspect stood, where Emma stepped out of Sam's reach, and the escape path to the main road. When laid out together, the suspect's approach pattern was strikingly clear: come in from the highway, get out briefly, wait at the perfect distance, grab the moment Emma separated from Sam, then retreat the same way. Every physical detail lined up with the initial statements the sheriff had collected: the strange truck, the moment Emma left the safe area, and the direction the vehicle disappeared. Combining the shoe prints, tire tracks, and movement analysis strengthened the early conclusion that this was not a spontaneous or random act, but a calculated one that picked the right moment and location. The scene didn't offer many additional traces, but the few that remained were critical in helping the sheriff map out the suspect's approach and withdrawal. This allowed him to focus the next phase of the investigation on tracking the vehicle and checking the escape route out of the neighborhood, because that was the exact path the suspect had used to take Emma out of everyone's reach in an extraordinarily short amount of time. The evidence at the scene showed that the green Ford F-100 played a central role in the abduction. So Sheriff Denton's next investigative focus was tracking down every vehicle of that make and model within a 50-mile radius of Denton. The sheriff's office quickly compiled a list of registered Ford F-100 owners in the area, but the number of older pickups still on the road was considerable, especially in farming country where the trucks were common for hauling supplies. In addition to the official registration list, the sheriff ordered checks on vehicles that had been sold privately and never re-registered, a widespread practice in the night. The initial list topped 40 trucks, forcing him to break it down by sector and send patrol units out for door-to-door verification. Beyond the paperwork, the sheriff widened the search to gas stations, repair garages and parking lots in the area, since the perpetrator might have stopped for fuel or made adjustments to the truck before or after the crime. Most small-town gas stations kept no detailed records, but attendants often remembered regulars or unusual vehicles that appeared out of the blue. Workers at 2 garages near Denton confirmed no green Ford F-100 matching the description had come in that morning, but at a station on the outskirts, a young attendant vaguely recalled a green pickup speeding through toward Gainesville around the time Emma vanished. Though he wasn't certain of the exact shade, the direction and the way the driver floored it matched the tire tracks left near the Carter place. Sheriff Denton logged the information and extended the search northward. Gainesville lay about 30 miles away, connected by a quiet dirt road that saw little traffic in the morning. A patrol team was dispatched to check old rest stops, cheap motels and private fuel pumps off the main grid. At the same time, additional units set up rolling roadblocks at key intersections in case the suspect was still moving inside the county. The Gainesville route, however, yielded no clear leads, no gas station recognized the truck, no new witnesses, and nowhere reported a man with a small child. Roadblock teams stopped every vehicle that was even vaguely the right color or body style, but none matched Sam's and Emma Lou's description. Many owners were pulled over for license and interior checks, yet all could prove they were somewhere else when Emma disappeared. As hours passed, the odds of the truck still being in the area shrank. The sheriff began considering that the perpetrator had not only left Denton but possibly Texas altogether that same morning, using federal highways that had no regular checkpoint. Route 380 headed east toward Louisiana and Arkansas, while 377 stretched north into Oklahoma. Both were easy to travel early in the day with little heavy truck traffic, so a Ford F-100 could blend in and make good time unnoticed. Denton ordered sweeps along both corridors. Patrols on 380 checked every small store and breakfast diner for anyone who might have seen the truck. A few locals reported seeing a green truck like the one described, but the times didn't match or they weren't sure of the plate. Waitresses along the route recalled no man with a young child, especially not near the time of the abduction. On 377 units stopped at every fuel stop, yet many weren't even open that early, so no one saw the truck pass. The sheriff noted that the suspect's getaway speed allowed the vehicle to outrun verification far faster than expected, stretching the pursuit gap within the first hours. Moreover, in that era there were no surveillance cameras, no toll booths recording plates. Tracking a vehicle by color and body style alone relied almost entirely on individual memory. After exhaustive checks in both directions, Denton returned to the collected data to see if any lesser-used escape route had been overlooked. A secondary dirt road branched south from Denton to an old highway, rarely traveled but perfect for avoiding detection. He sent a team to look for tire tracks or signs of stopping, but heavier trucks had already churned the surface that morning, erasing any potential evidence. With the usual routes yielding nothing, the sheriff concluded the abductor had planned the exit carefully and cleanly. The man could have taken a major road and melted into long-haul traffic, or slipped onto an obscure local route no one would suspect. The time between Emma being taken and roadblocks going up was enough for the truck to be dozens of miles away. Vehicle pursuit was pushed to every limit possible that morning, but the difficulty of tracking an older truck with no clear plate, no distinctive marking and moving fast across Texas's vast road network shifted the investigation's focus from the highways to figuring out why the perpetrator chose that exact moment and direction. The morning ended with miles of roads searched and no confirmed sighting of the green Ford F-100, forcing the sheriff to widen the net toward more indirect clues for the next breakthrough. With road sweeps producing no results, Sheriff Denton shifted focus to secondary witnesses within a 2-kilometer radius of the Carter home. Since the sparsely populated neighborhood might have unknowingly registered unusual activity, deputies went door to door, starting with homes along the dirt road to the main highway, concentrating on the window before and after Emma disappeared. Most residents heard no loud noises or speeding engines. The morning had been quiet, but a few recalled dust kicking up like a vehicle had gunned it, though they didn't get a good look. An elderly man in a log house to the east said he saw a green truck flash by very early, moving faster than normal, but distance and tree cover prevented him from reading the plate or noting anything specific. The scattered fragments weren't precise, yet they reinforced the idea that the abductor accelerated deliberately the moment he left the scene. While working each household, the sheriff paid special attention to anyone with a sightline toward the escape route, the woman living across from the vacant lot where the truck had parked the previous day. She only vaguely remembered a man standing by the driver's door, taller than average, wearing a light-colored shirt, possibly white or pale yellow. She couldn't make out his face against the morning sun, but she was sure he wasn't anyone she recognized in the area. A young man nearby recalled hearing an older engine crank for a while, the distinctive coughing sound of a 1950s-60s truck, followed by a long rev as it took off. He said it sounded poorly maintained or heavily loaded, but it didn't seem unusual enough to look out the window. Taken together, the pieces painted a picture of a stranger in an older truck who appeared at exactly the right moment and left just as fast, never interacting with anyone around him. Sheriff Denton realized a preliminary composite sketch was needed for comparison, even with the vague description. He pulled together the three witnesses whose accounts overlapped most: the neighbor across from the vacant lot, a woman who glimpsed the man while making coffee out back, and a small ranch owner at the end of the road who saw a tall man walking near the tree line, but wasn't sure of the exact time. Stringer, the sheriff's office sketch artist, noted every detail. Height estimated 5 to 6. The face was the hardest. 3 witnesses gave 3 different impressions. One said long, another angular. The third familiar somehow, but I can't place why. Stringer settled on the most common features, producing a simple but usable composite for internal circulation. The sketch was shown at every place a stranger might have stopped that morning: small motels, roadside inns, boarding houses, and short-term rentals. Most reported no one matching the drawing. The owner of a small motel on 380 insisted no lone man checked in that morning. All guests from the night before had registered earlier, and none had checked out yet. A boarding house operator to the north confirmed no one resembling the sketch, asked about a room. At a general store, a clerk remembered a stranger buying cigarettes the day before, but his truck was a Chevrolet and nothing else matched. The sheriff checked monthly and bi-weekly rentals, popular with transients, but those were tightly managed by locals or occupied by long-term tenants. The man simply never appeared anywhere people might stay nearby. Every secondary witness interview pointed the same way. The man showed up once, spoke to no one, stopped nowhere to buy anything, never rested, never asked directions, left no trace of interaction. This led Denton to conclude the perpetrator deliberately avoided every possible stop, and likely knew the escape routes well enough, or at least understood that lingering in Denton would make him memorable. He flagged the strong possibility the abductor was passing through at high speed, perhaps coming from elsewhere with the sole purpose of targeting Emma. The fact that no one saw the truck stop again within the 2-kilometer zone underscored that the man stayed only as long as necessary to grab her, commit the act, and flee. The deeper the identification cross-check went, the clearer it became that the perpetrator was either prepared or experienced at moving through small towns unnoticed. The composite was necessary but produced no real progress. The investigation was now facing a careful, unfamiliar subject who knew how to stay invisible, and the sheriff knew he had to find fresh physical evidence to break the initial deadlock. With local identification efforts yielding no breakthrough, Sheriff Denton forwarded the entire case file to the FBI's Dallas field office under the standard protocol for child abductions with suspected interstate elements. All documentation, the preliminary composite, vehicle description, approach and escape timeline, primary and secondary witness statements, and maps of probable routes, was sent the same day. The Dallas Missing Children agent immediately opened an assistance file and prioritized behavioral analysis to determine the offender's profile. The initial facts showed a fast, clean operation with no random interactions in the neighborhood, and the target was a 5-year-old girl taken from just yards from home. The FBI classified this as characteristic of an opportunistic taker who nevertheless showed vehicle preparation. The agent believed Emma Carter was not chosen randomly from a crowd, but selected because she was an easy target momentarily separated from her brother by only a few feet, reflecting distant observation and an instant decision. The approach from the main road and immediate return to the same escape route suggested the perpetrator either knew the area or had passed through before. Someone unfamiliar with the roads would struggle to know the most concealed turn, the least visible place to turn around, and the fastest way out without hitting a checkpoint. The FBI flagged the likelihood the subject came from a neighboring state like Oklahoma, or at least regularly traveled routes 77 and 380, the major arteries linking rural areas to small towns. The fact he never stopped at any motel, rest stop, or gas station within 50 miles indicated he traveled much farther that same morning, possibly leaving Texas before roadblocks were fully in place. The FBI dug deeper into motive and behavioral type. 3 primary categories were prioritized: lone males with histories of social failure, women with psychological disorders tied to child loss or infertility, and known child abductors operating in the South and Midwest. However, every witness who saw the driver described a man, no woman was seen with him, and no second person exited the truck to grab Emma, so the initial focus tilted heavily toward a lone male offender. The agent noted that most nonviolent child abductions at the moment of taking are committed by individuals seeking a replacement child, or attempting to create a pretend family. Such offenders tend to take the child far from the crime scene, avoid medical care, and keep the child out of public school systems for years. This prompted the FBI to request immediate checks of hospitals, birthing centers, and birth certificate registries in surrounding counties, specifically looking for any child suddenly registered days or weeks after the disappearance. Queries went out to every hospital in North Texas, then expanded to Oklahoma and Louisiana. Newborn lists were screened against 3 red flags: no mother listed, medical records inconsistent with stated age, or home birth claims with no witnesses and no prior prenatal record locally. By the end of the first sweep, no new birth records raised suspicion. The FBI added another layer: lists of women who had recently miscarried or delivered stillborn within 100 miles, checking for severe psychological distress or attempts to fake a pregnancy. Sheriff Denton, however, reiterated that the only witness sightings were of a man, no woman in the cab, no sign of anyone else, causing the FBI to keep the female perpetrator theory on the table, but deprioritize it. The lone male category became the behavioral focus. Offenders in this group are often itinerant laborers, long-haul drivers, mechanics, drifters, or marginal individuals with no stable family ties. They commonly drive older 1950s-60s pickups, cross state lines frequently, and may live out of their vehicles, abandoned properties, or construction sites. The FBI supplied Denton with records of individuals with prior child-taking behavior of unclear motive in nearby states. They also noted the subject likely appeared ordinary enough that communities noticed but didn't remember him, making identification harder. Behavioral analysis further revealed a high degree of emotional control during the grab. He didn't bolt when Sam turned around, made no panic noise, executed the act in seconds, and immediately drove off. This was not the profile impulsively out of control, but rather someone who had either repeated the pattern before, or at least mentally rehearsed it. Agents also hypothesized the perpetrator may have watched the Carter house for some minutes beforehand, just long enough to know the exact moment Emma separated from Sam. They asked Denton to check for any unfamiliar workers, traveling salesmen, phone repairmen, or anyone in a small truck in the days prior. All reports of strangers that week were logged, but no name or description matched. When hospital and birth registry checks turned up no child inserted into a new identity, the FBI concluded this was not a classic replacement child case, but more likely a trans-regional abduction. The child taken far away immediately, never brought to medical care, and kept hidden long-term by severely limiting social contact. These analyses made the danger clear to Sheriff Denton. The perpetrator never lingered, traveled far, knew the roads, and left almost no trace. The FBI file supplemented an investigation heading toward a dead end, but also revealed a critical insight: the man who took Emma belonged to the rare group, capable of disappearing from the social map for years, even decades, unless a new lead exploded onto the scene. FBI analysis indicated the perpetrator likely got Emma out of the area extremely quickly, forcing Sheriff Denton to expand the search to a scale never before deployed in Denton County. It began with bringing in a specialized K-9 unit for missing children to sweep the entire hillside behind the Carter house and the strips of land connecting the dirt road to secondary turnoffs. The dogs were given Emma's clothing to scent and immediately took off in the direction the F-100 had fled, but only a few hundred yards later the trail abruptly vanished, exactly where the dirt turned to asphalt, matching the spot where witnesses saw the truck accelerate. The K-9 teams went back and searched bushes, open lots, and tall grass, but found no dropped items, no shoes, hair ribbons, or scraps of clothing. This reinforced the conclusion that Emma had been placed in the vehicle instantly with no struggle that left evidence behind. When the ground search yielded nothing, the sheriff called in a Texas Highway Patrol Bell helicopter to scan the fields, abandoned farms, and sparse woods bordering the residential area. The chopper flew in a zigzag grid, looking for tire tracks, vehicles that had pulled off into clearings, or any signs of a stop. Every suspicious patch was flagged for ground teams to check, but one by one they all turned up empty of any indication the Ford F-100. At the same time, divers were deployed to check stock ponds, irrigation lakes, and large farm tanks within a several-mile radius, following standard missing child protocols of the era. The divers worked in teams, spiraling outward from the center of each body of water, but murky water and heavy silt made visibility nearly impossible. Still, after almost a full day checking 8 large lakes and 5 smaller ponds, nothing related to Emma was found. Searching the sewer system in the nearby neighborhoods was also considered, because some older lines had metal manhole covers that could be lifted without drawing attention. Technicians walked every line, shining high-powered lights inside, but found no belongings, clothing or small footprint. Abandoned houses, old barns and unused livestock sheds were thoroughly checked, room by room, corner by corner, even the roofs. Some showed signs that transients had slept there, but the traces were months old and unrelated to the time of Emma's disappearance. Parallel to all this, police canvassed every household within a 3-mile radius, paying special attention to homes with detached sheds, enclosed garages or old trucks parked in the yard. Every family was asked the same questions: did you see a strange vehicle, hear any unusual noise, anyone stop and ask for directions, anyone park nearby and then leave? Aside from the already known descriptions of the green truck speeding past, no one offered anything new. A large ranch to the east had an empty livestock barn that many thought a strange vehicle might have passed. The search team brought the canines inside, but the dogs picked up no human scent except the owner's family. The thinly wooded areas were divided into grid squares, and search parties walked shoulder to shoulder, turning over every board, opening every discarded barrel, and probing every suspicious mound of dirt. But everything was empty. Denton County had never mounted a multi-layered search of this magnitude before: ground, air, underwater, sewers, private homes, abandoned properties. Yet apart from confirming Emma had been removed from the area with extraordinary speed, nothing narrowed the direction of the investigation. As the sun set, the sheriff reviewed the entire search map and decided to push the perimeter farther out in case the perpetrator had used back roads that looped behind farms to avoid the main routes. More than 30 volunteers kept searching through the night with flashlights, combing every bush, but still found nothing. The biggest difficulty was that no location showed the perpetrator had stopped even for a few minutes. The entire wide area operation ended in a heavy atmosphere: no tire tracks, no items Emma had dropped, no temporary stops, no new witnesses, no single piece that could extend the chain of clues. By the end of the second day, the sheriff had to write in his report that there was no sign Emma was still within the search radius. A bitter but accurate conclusion. The perpetrator and the 5-year-old girl had vanished from the area as if swallowed off the map in the blink of an eye. The wide area search produced no positive results, so the Emma Carter file gradually entered a period of stagnation. By late 1961, the investigation had to be scaled back because the sheriff's department could not sustain that level of mobilization indefinitely without new leads. Sheriff Denton kept the case flagged as special priority, but routine follow-ups checking green Ford F-100s in the region, sending interstate bulletins became repetitive procedures that opened no new avenues. The original witnesses began moving away or grew less reliable as time blurred their memories. The woman who saw the man's silhouette by the truck was no longer certain about the color of his shirt or his age. The old man who saw the truck speeding early that morning could no longer pin down the exact time, only saying sometime early. The young man who heard the prolonged engine start had moved to another town for work and could not be reached again for clarification. The initial descriptions, already vague, became nearly unusable for identification purposes. Physical evidence collected at the scene, faint tire marks and strange shoe prints in the dirt, could not be preserved to modern standards because technology at the time was limited. Shoe print casts had to be stored on paper and photographs, but many photos faded. 2 tire tread casts were damaged by moisture in the harsh storage conditions of the evidence room. Some early patrol officers' notes were lost during file transfers. As the evidence lost forensic value and could no longer be compared to other cases, the chance of finding matches grew ever slimmer. Hospital newborn screenings continued for another 3 years per federal schedule, but by 1963, every birth record in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana showed no child matching Emma's description or any suspicious registration. There were no cases lacking a mother's paperwork, no misidentified ages, no children who had suddenly appeared in small communities. All indicators gradually confirmed one reality: Emma had been taken too quickly and too far for the registration systems of the era to detect. The Carter family kept mailing letters to police departments in neighboring states every year, hoping a child resembling Emma would surface in a report, but the answer was always the same: no matches. In 1964, some younger officers new to the job reviewed the file and suggested checking cases of children left at churches or charities, but every one involved diapered infants, none the age Emma would have been. By then Sheriff Denton was aging, and held on hoping for a break, but none came. In 1965, after 5 straight years of monitoring, the Dallas FBI officially downgraded the file from active investigation support to pending information, meaning it would only be reopened if local authorities received new leads. It was not the end of the investigation, but it marked the case leaving the category requiring continuous federal attention. The Carters received the notice, and though heartbroken, understood no agency could do more, when the trail had all but vanished. In 1966, Denton County reorganized its records to categorize unsolved cases from the previous decade, and in July of that year, Emma Carter's disappearance was officially coded Cold Case 6. The complete dossier was sealed in a steel cabinet containing the original composite sketch, route maps, witness statements, crime scene photos, and investigation notes. Moving the file to cold case status was not an abandonment. It was an acknowledgement that every method available at the time, from vehicle tracing to road checks, wide area searches, behavioral analysis, and hospital reviews, had been exhausted. The Carters still visited the sheriff's office every year on the anniversary of Emma's disappearance to ask if anything new had come up, and every time the answer was the same: nothing yet. Gradually the town of Denton went on with life as usual, but the name Emma Carter became a faint shadow in the community's collective memory, surviving only in the cold lines of county records. A silent abduction with no evidence, no resolution, swallowed by decades of silence. While the Emma Carter file slowly slid into cold case status in Texas, the little girl's life took a completely different turn under a new name in Louisiana. There, in early 1961, Emma, then just 5 years old, reappeared in the local community system as Anna Brooks. The legal guardian listed was a middle-aged woman living alone on the outskirts of Shreveport, named Helen Brooks, recorded as the biological mother, despite there being no birth records whatsoever. At that time, Louisiana still allowed late birth registrations for home-raised children, as long as an adult signed an affidavit and submitted a simple home birth attestation. Helen prepared a basic statement claiming Anna had been born in 1955 in a small town outside Shreveport, and that she had not taken the child to a hospital due to finances and a family tradition of home births. With no interstate cross-checking system, and southern states in the early 1960s not requiring pregnancy records or midwife verification, Helen's affidavit was accepted without question. From that moment on, Emma officially lived as Anna Brooks, with no paper trail linking her to Texas. In the following years, Helen kept the child isolated from the community to avoid any unnecessary attention. When she enrolled Anna in elementary school in 1962, Helen chose a small rural district school where most students were farm kids, strangers were rare, and federal oversight was minimal. Anna's admission file required only the newly issued birth certificate, proof of address, and guardian information. The school asked no questions about missing vaccination records or hospital files, because home births were still common in the countryside. Helen instructed Anna never to talk about any memories from before living with Mommy, and if a teacher or anyone asked about her past, she was only allowed to say, "I've lived here all my life." Helen knew a 5-year-old's memories could be reshaped and eventually fade if the new story was reinforced long enough. So every night she repeated fabricated tales about Anna's early years in Louisiana. In the first 3 years they moved 3 times within the Shreveport area, from a small wooden house by the woods to a rental in an older part of town, then to a final house near the edge of the swamp. Each move was explained as Mom's job changed, or rent went up, but in reality Helen wanted to sever any chance that someone from a previous neighborhood might notice behavioral changes or spot inconsistencies. At every location she avoided neighbors, greeting them only when unavoidable. Teachers described Anna as quiet but polite, speaking little, rarely joining group activities, and always keeping her distance from strangers. When asked about family, she gave only the short answers Helen had taught her. During summer breaks, instead of letting Anna attend community programs, Helen kept her indoors or took her to remote areas, so she would not talk to anyone who might accidentally overhear or ask questions. Helen also kept Anna out of whole class photographs, an absence that raised no red flags at the time because class pictures were not yet mandatory, minimizing any visual record that could later be traced. Any items that might remind her of Texas were eliminated completely. Every piece of clothing, toy, or accessory Anna had arrived with was replaced. Helen allowed her to keep nothing, not even a scrap of fabric or a pair of shoes, ensuring that when old memories faded, there would be no object to trigger them. In 1963, as Anna began settling in more at school, Helen made it the child occasionally mentioning two big brothers I used to play with, a fragmented memory from Emma's life with her siblings back in Texas. Each time Helen immediately dismissed it, telling her she had only dreamed it or was confusing playmates from an old neighborhood, causing Anna to doubt her own recollection. Over time those flashes appeared less often, and by age 7 had disappeared entirely. In 1964, Helen moved Anna completely out of the Shreveport area to a smaller town near the Mississippi border, to ensure that even if someone who had seen Anna in Shreveport ever traveled to Texas, the chance of connecting the two identities was virtually zero. At the new location she enrolled her in school, without any issues, because Anna's paperwork was now complete by the standards of the day. The two lived quietly, no one asked further questions. Step by step Helen erased every trace that could lead back to Texas. No official transactions, no doctor visits, no community involvement, no appearances in newspaper photos or school events. The little girl grew up under her new identity in absolute silence about her origins, while the true story, Emma Carter of Denton, Texas, was buried completely beneath the false records of Anna Brooks throughout the years. After years living under the name Anna Brooks that Helen had built, Emma entered her teenage years with a thin, gap-filled paper trail, a reality that gradually revealed contradictions that teachers, administrative staff, and a few passing acquaintances felt were off, even though no one had enough evidence to ask direct questions. When Anna was about 12, the school required an update of records to standardize data under new Louisiana regulations, including a valid birth certificate. The birth certificate Helen had previously submitted was a delayed birth certificate, a late registration issued based on personal affidavit, which met earlier standards, but no longer satisfied the new verification rules. Unable to create a real birth record, Helen was forced to go to the parish courthouse and obtain an additional certification copy, a minimalist version that listed only the name, date of birth, and guardian, requiring no proof of delivery or medical confirmation. Though this document was legal at the time, the administrative clerk noted that Anna's file was missing obstetrical information. But since there was still no federal cross-checking mechanism, the school could not reject it. Helen left the courthouse with the new paper and immediately became more guarded, realizing that as Anna grew older, the administrative system would have more points of comparison. By age 13, the school demanded a Social Security number SSN be submitted for student record management under expanding federal education policy. Helen could not provide one because Anna had never been issued one. She explained that she had worked freelance and never filed taxes, so she had not gotten an SSN for her daughter. At that time the federal government was only encouraging SSNs for children, not requiring them, so Helen's explanation was accepted. She took Anna to the Social Security Administration office and applied for a new number. The clerk asked a few simple questions about residence history and schooling. Helen answered smoothly because she had rehearsed the story in advance. No one dug deeper because in the 1960s and 1970s, issuing SSNs to children did not require cross-verification with medical records or hospital certification. Anna received a late but valid SSN, further reinforcing the shell of the identity Helen had constructed. At school, however, some teachers began noticing unusual gaps in Anna's family story. The girl routinely avoided assignments that required describing multi-generational families, never attended Parents' Day events, and whenever classmates talked about relatives or grandparents, Anna went silent or changed the subject. One language arts teacher who made a habit of observing students' psychology gently asked if Anna wanted to talk about her early childhood, and Anna shook her head saying, "I don't remember much." That wasn't unheard of for kids who had moved a lot, but the emptiness in Anna's responses made the teacher feel something was wrong. Still, with no concrete evidence to report, the teacher simply made a note in the psychological file, something that at the time was not treated as a serious issue. On another occasion, the school nurse discovered Anna had no complete vaccination history. When Helen was asked, she immediately replied, I had her vaccinated at a private clinic. They didn't keep records. Since there was no federal immunization registry yet, no one could verify the claim. Missing data was normal for some rural kids, so the nurse's suspicion went nowhere. When Anna turned 14, the inconsistencies in her paperwork became clearer, but still not enough for anyone to raise serious questions. Classmates submitting forms for summer camps or gifted programs usually had detailed birth certificates and hospital records. Anna only had the late-issued copy and a few formal documents. A science teacher once asked Anna where she was born, and she answered Shreveport, as she had been taught. But when the teacher followed up with which hospital, Anna hesitated, looked down at her desk and said, "I don't know, Mom said I was born at home." The teacher could only write in the comment book, "Family background vague." These small suspicions appeared here and there, but were never pieced together into a bigger picture. Helen, with her extreme caution, always kept Anna away from any situation that might lead to deep record checks. She did not let her daughter join activities requiring hospital signatures, refused sports programs that demanded physical exams, and answered teachers' follow-up questions about the family with a defensive attitude. In the local community, the two kept to themselves, so others lacked enough information to become suspicious. A few neighbors occasionally remarked that Anna didn't look or act like Helen at all. But since no one knew Helen's past, the comment turned into meaningless gossip. Most importantly, before 1980 there was no federal mechanism to cross-check missing children data across states. No photo lists, no central database, no Amber Alert system, no matching of birth certificates, or SS. That meant Emma, with her delayed birth certificate and late-issued SSN, was indistinguishable from thousands of other home-birthed children of the era. No one in Louisiana had reason to suspect she had once appeared in Texas, let alone the infrastructure to connect 2 points hundreds of miles apart. Those tiny cracks in the file, though obvious from a modern perspective, were simply not enough back then to form a criminal suspicion. And because Emma's, now Anna's, records were never federally scrutinized, never cross-referenced with missing children lists, never flagged in hospitals or schools, she continued to grow up inside the carefully constructed and tightly controlled shell Helen Brooks had built, passing through adolescence without anyone knowing that the girl's real identity had once shocked a small Texas town. As Anna entered adulthood, the gaps that had persisted from her teenage years in her civil records became more obvious whenever she tried to apply for jobs, rent an apartment, or complete routine procedures that ordinary people breezed through. Companies requiring detailed personal information, place of birth, family history, complete academic records, routinely flagged her file as missing information or unable to verify, forcing Anna to settle for jobs that did not require deep background checks. She worked as a waitress, part-time cashier, store assistant, and seasonal temporary jobs, staying only a few months before moving on. Instead of trying to patch the holes in her records, Anna chose constant relocation as a way to avoid having to explain. Each time she moved, all she needed was the minimalist birth certificate copy and the late-issued Social Security number. 2 valid documents, but not enough to force any agency to dig deeper. Frequent moves became a habit, a way to escape the feeling of being scrutinized, and to avoid long-term relationships that might lead to questions about her origins. In her mid-20s, she met a kind mechanic who cared little about family background. They married simply at the courthouse, no ceremony, no relatives present. While filling out the marriage application, Anna faced for the first time the requirement to list her parents' full names, a detail every civil ceremony took for granted. She hesitated over the blank space, then wrote Helen Brooks in the mother field, and left the father line empty with the reason identity unknown. The clerk did not ask further because the law at the time did not require federal verification of parents, but her future husband went quiet for a few seconds, when he realized his wife had almost no childhood stories to tell. When he gently asked, "Where did you grow up?" Anna gave the familiar answer Helen had taught her, "Shreveport, my whole life." Follow-up questions. "Do you have siblings? Why have I never heard you mention them? Do you have any other family?" Made her avoid her husband's eyes, answering briefly or changing the subject. It wasn't that she wanted to hide things. She herself could not access anything behind the shell that had been built around her since childhood. As the early years of marriage passed, applying for credit, opening joint bank accounts, or signing up for insurance once again exposed the blurry boundaries of her past. Some banks accepted her file, but others demanded proof of residence history or next of kin information. Anna could not provide it and simply let her husband sign alone. This increased her financial dependence on her spouse and pushed her further into the small, closed world Helen had always wanted for her. She avoided deep conversations with neighbors, did not maintain long friendships with new coworkers, and almost never mentioned childhood in any conversation. When caught off guard, for example, when someone shared a family story and then asked, "What about you? What were you like as a kid?" Anna would smile it off, say, "I don't remember much," or "We moved around a lot when I was little." After enough of these moments, people simply assumed she was a private, introverted person who didn't talk about personal matters. No one imagined that behind it was an identity broken since age 5. Sometimes on quiet evenings, looking at the thin documents Helen had left behind, Anna felt a strange emptiness she couldn't name. She had vague memories of a different house, different sunlight, children's laughter running around, but every time those memories surfaced, they slipped away like incomplete dreams. And with nothing to compare them to, the scattered images stayed in her mind like faint sparks, not strong enough to break the life Helen had built since. The fragile stability Anna had maintained for years suddenly changed when Helen, the person who held every secret of her life, died at age 73. The death was quiet, in their small house after a mild stroke no one noticed in time. After the funeral arrangements were complete, the parish attorney sent Anna a short will along with a message that Helen had left her a suitcase she said Anna must open herself. The only item delivered was an old dark brown leather suitcase, its lock rusted and handle worn smooth by time. Anna opened it in the living room with a sense of unease, because for years Helen had forbidden her to touch anything stored in the back room. Inside the suitcase, Anna found items that did not match the life story Helen had told her: a torn old Texas map with the Denton area circled in red ink, a faded child's shirt with the hand-embroidered initials C on the collar, and an old photograph of a girl about 4 or 5 years old, who looked nothing like Anna at any stage she could remember. The photo froze Anna in place for a long time. Light blonde hair, wide eyes and a white bow. Everything felt foreign yet triggered a vague sensation, as if it were a memory fragment that had been dropped from her mind. The more she looked, the more she realized the suitcase contained nothing related to the Shreveport childhood Helen had described, and everything pointed instead to a place Helen had never once mentioned: Texas. The shirt with EC haunted her most. Anna had never been called those initials, and Helen had never sewn or kept any of her childhood clothes. For the first time as an adult, Anna clearly felt that a part of the truth had been hidden very carefully. The question she had always avoided came back in sharper form. Where did she really come from? Why had Helen never wanted her to know anything about the past? And why were another child's belongings in the suitcase Helen had specifically left for her? Unease turned into a need to verify. Anna drove to the parish courthouse and asked to see the original birth certificate issuance file. The clerk could only provide Helen's home birth affidavit, exactly what Anna had always known, with no additional information. When she asked if there were older records, the clerk shook her head. "There's nothing else." She filed a delayed certificate, and it was accepted. Anna went to the SSA office, hoping to trace the original history of her social security number, but the file only showed the issuance date. No actual birthplace, no flags that would trigger alerts. She tried matching EC to any name in her documents, and found nothing. Her already faint childhood memories offered no guidance. Even when she tried to recall the first house in Shreveport, all she saw were blurred images, like dreams mixed with disconnected fragments. Checking hospitals near Helen's old home yielded nothing. No birth record existed under the name Anna or Helen Brooks. Every path led Anna back to the brown leather suitcase and its meaningless yet heavily suggestive content. The more she searched, the deeper she sank into the feeling that she was a person created from paperwork rather than memories. Helen had taken the most important part of the truth to the grave, leaving Anna a suitcase of mismatched pieces: Texas map, shirt with, and a photo of a strange little girl, as a reminder that her life had not begun in Louisiana as she had been led to believe, but somewhere else, tied to a different name she had never once been called. In the years following Helen's death, Anna lived in a limbo between confusion and acceptance until a health issue forced her, for the first time, to face the question every doctor asked: What is your family medical history? Unable to answer, Anna decided to use the popular genetic testing service 23andMe to check for hereditary risks. She simply thought the results would tell her whether she was at risk for heart disease, diabetes, or hereditary cancers. She never imagined that test would fling open a door to a past hidden for more than half a century. When the kit was mailed back to the lab, Anna forgot about it for weeks. When the email arrived saying the results were ready, she opened her account casually, only to freeze at the very first line under relatives. The system showed multiple matches labeled close family and first cousin, all with the surname Carter, mostly located in Texas. Strange names appeared with genetic connections far too strong to be coincidence. Anna stared at the words shared DNA 25%, a level of similarity that could not come from distant relatives, but from blood relatives she had never known existed. She clicked on the public profile of one listed as Samuel Carter Jr., but the account was private. Still, 23andMe labeled him a potential sibling. More genetic data only deepened her confusion. A large cluster of matches belonged to the same Carter family, many living in North Texas. The automated genetic analysis displayed a warning. Unusual clustering suggests unidentified biological relatives. In the help section, the program suggested users contact cold case authorities if they suspected a connection to a person missing for decades. Anna couldn't understand why a health test had led her to that warning, but the constant Carter connections had triggered a special flag in 23andMe's algorithm, a feature developed in cooperation with NamUs, National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, and law enforcement to identify long missing persons. A cold case 1960 Denton, Texas profile in NamUs had been updated in 2010 with DNA from the Carter family. When the algorithm detected an unusually high genetic match to that reference DNA, it automatically generated a potential match, missing person alert. At the same time, 23andMe's partner laboratory, following an agreed protocol with law enforcement, sent a match report containing no detailed personal data, only the degree of DNA relationship to NamUs for review. The close family level match immediately flagged Anna's profile as a possible link to the 1960 Texas cold case of a 5-year-old girl who vanished from the town of Denton. After internal cross-checking, the data was forwarded to the Texas Rangers, the unit that handles the state's long-dormant cases. The ranger responsible for North Texas cold cases received the notice in early 2020. Possible biological match to cold case DN6. It was the first concrete genetic lead on Emma's file in over half a century. Although the report did not yet confirm identity, the DNA similarity was strong enough for the ranger to request deeper analysis and prepare the procedure to approach the person behind the 20. As for Anna, staring at the flood of Carter genetic matches and the rare warning on her screen, a realization hit her. The old suitcase, the Texas map, the child's dress embroidered with EC, the photo of the little girl, had not been random. What she had sensed intuitively but could never put into words was now spelled out clearly by her own biological data. Her origins were not in Louisiana, and her life had never truly begun as Anna Brooks. The NamUs alert was immediately routed to Texas Ranger Michael Hayes, head of the North Texas Cold Case Unit, and one of the most experienced investigators of cases dormant for over 50 years. Reading the line potential biological match to cold case SIN 60E, Hayes took immediate notice. It was a child disappearance he had reviewed years earlier, a file that had almost no breakthroughs. He ordered the entire original 1960 case file pulled from storage. The old folders arrived on his desk, yellowed paper, faded photos, blurry composite sketches, and the Denton sheriff's handwritten notes. Hayes had everything digitized, every photograph, every map, every scribbled line, so modern data analysis systems could process them. Technicians helped him rebuild the crime scene diagram, timeline, and witness list using reconstruction software. The once scattered, faded documents became sharp and clear on screen, letting Hayes finally see the full picture. His next step was to compare the new DNA data against whatever scraps remained in the original file. The genetic match between Anna and the Carter family was far too close to be coincidence, and NamUs proactively forwarding the alert to the Rangers meant the data's reliability was extremely high. Hayes ordered a re-examination of the Carter family's records. The day Emma vanished, the age of her older brother Sam, their parents, and the relatives who had previously submitted DNA. The match aligned perfectly with a parent-child or full sibling relationship, leading Hayes to conclude that the woman named Anna Brooks, who had tested for health reasons, was very likely Emma Carter, missing since. To confirm identity, however, he needed to prove the rest of the equation: who Helen Brooks was, and why 5-year-old Emma had reappeared in Louisiana under a new name. Hayes began tracing Helen's history. Public records showed she moved to Louisiana in late 1960, mere months after Emma's disappearance. Helen's frequent moves from Shreveport to small towns left a fragmented residency trail, but records of her temporary work near the East Texas border, right at the time Emma vanished, were enough for Hayes to note suspicious presence at exact time frame. Delayed birth certificates, the kind Helen obtained for Anna Brooks, were re-examined. Ranger Hayes discovered the 1961 delayed certificate had no medical verification and relied solely on an adult's affidavit, which was legal at the time but fit perfectly with a scenario of concealing a child taken across state lines. With solid grounds that Helen was present at the critical moment, Hayes moved to reconstruct the disappearance timeline using the newly digitized. He compiled details from various reports: when Emma and Sam went out to the yard, when the Ford F-100 appeared, when a strange man was seen near the fence, when Emma was carried away, and when the truck sped off. Applying this to a digital map, Hayes determined the likely escape route, factoring in vehicle speed and the time the family realized Emma was gone. The reconstruction showed the abduction occurred in an extremely short window and followed a clear path: approach from the main road, stop near the gate, pick Emma up, and leave the neighborhood in under 2 minutes. The perpetrator could then have turned toward Louisiana, matching the timing of Helen's appearance in Shreveport. For the first time in 64 years, Hayes could piece together every fragment. Emma vanished from Denton the same moment Helen left Texas. Emma reappeared in Louisiana with a new identity created by Helen. The Texas map in Helen's suitcase circled Denton. The child's dress embroidered matched Emma Carter's initials, and most crucially, the genealogical DNA showed a direct family match. All the disconnected clues across half a century, from faint tire tracks in the Carter yard to the delayed birth certificate in Shreveport, finally formed a single precise, coherent chain of events. To Ranger Hayes, this was no longer speculation. It was the complete structure of Emma Carter's journey from Texas to Louisiana, from an erased past to an identity on the verge of being confirmed. Ranger Hayes's analysis indicated an extremely high probability that Anna Brooks was Emma Carter, but to establish identity beyond any dispute, he needed direct DNA testing between Anna and surviving Carter descendants. Hayes contacted 2 of Emma's nieces and nephews, children of her brother Sam, who had submitted DNA to NamUs years earlier. Both agreed immediately upon hearing the Texas Rangers were investigating a rare genetic match. Fresh DNA samples were collected from them to ensure the most current and accurate data possible. Hayes wanted no margin for error, especially in a case spanning more than 6 decades. After obtaining Anna's formal consent, he arranged a private session at the Texas DPS-affiliated lab in Austin. Anna, still unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what was happening, agreed because she felt the truth was finally within reach. The first sample was taken via saliva and cheek swab. Hayes ordered a second independent test, using blood to rule out any cross-contamination or procedural mistake, standard protocol for long-term missing person identification. While awaiting results, Anna lived on edge, torn between hope and fear. If positive, her life would change forever. If negative, the suitcase, the Texas map, the EC dress, and the DNA coincidences would mean nothing. 3 weeks later, the first report arrived directly at Hayes's office. The thick document contained one line that made him pause for a long time. Probability of biological parent-child relationship. The second independent test, completed days later, produced the same result, with DNA voblap between Anna and the Carter descendants equivalent to a mother-child or full sibling relationship, depending on the comparison structure. This confirmed not only Anna's Texas origins, but that she was a direct blood descendant of Henry and Margaret Carter. Both tests from 2 independent laboratories reached the same conclusion: the woman known as Anna Brooks was in fact Emma Carter, missing. With mere absolute DNA evidence, Hayes completed the full legal file. He drafted the identification report and submitted it to the Texas Forensic Medical Examiner and the Rangers Central Cold Case Office. After verification, the file was sent to NamUs to change the case status from missing unresolved to located confirmed identity. A key part of the process was verifying biological and morphological consistency. Anna's adult height was compared to projected growth from Emma's height at age 5. The numbers matched within acceptable margin. Carter family records noted Emma had a small scar on her left leg from a fall at age 3. Hayes asked Anna to check, and she confirmed a several centimeter scar in exactly that spot, one whose origin she had never remembered. The photo of the little girl in Helen's suitcase, which had puzzled Anna for years, when compared to old Carter family photos in the file, showed matching features: eyes, cheekbones, mouth structure. Hayes did not rely on the photo for conclusion, but it reinforced that Helen's suitcase was no coincidence. After completing every item, every check, every piece of evidence, Hayes signed the final document confirming Emma Carter, missing June 12, 1960 in Denton, Texas, is currently living under the name Anna Brooks. For the first time in over 64 years, the Texas justice system could confirm Emma's existence with absolute scientific proof. The identification file closed with a short line Hayes typed slowly into the final field. Victim located alive. Emma, not yet fully grasping the legal weight of those words, finally knew the biggest missing piece of her life. The real name stolen from her for 6 decades had been returned in full. The DNA test results confirmed that Anna Brooks was Emma Carter, prompting Ranger Hayes to immediately move to the next phase, notifying the surviving members of the Carter family. He started with the list of relatives stored in the NamUs file and the genealogical documents the family had provided years earlier. The first names on the list, sadly, all belonged to the generation that had passed away. Henry and Margaret Carter, Emma's parents, died just a few years apart in the 1980s, never knowing where their daughter was. Her older brother Sam, who had run frantically around the yard on the morning of, died in 2010 after a sudden illness. The news that Emma might still be alive came too late for Sam to hear. That truth hung heavily over the calls Hayes was about to make, but he knew the remaining family deserved to know. Emma's 2 nieces and nephews, Lauren and Michael, Sam's children, were the closest living direct blood relatives. The 2 lived in different states, Lauren in Colorado and Michael in New Mexico, but they stayed in touch and had both voluntarily submitted DNA to aid the investigation into the family's missing person cases. Hayes decided to call Lauren first. NamUs notes showed she had been the one actively following the case for years. When Hayes told her there was a completely new definitive result in the 1960 cold case, Lauren went silent for several seconds before asking to switch to video so she could hear it face to face. Hayes briefly explained the testing, the near-perfect DNA match, and the identity of Anna Brooks. Lauren brought her hand to her mouth, her voice breaking as she heard the words "Emma is alive." She said her father, Sam, had spent his entire life asking that question, and the most heartbreaking part for him was never getting the chance to know the answer before he died. When Lauren told Michael, his reaction was similar: a long silence, then repeated questions about whether there could be any mistake. Once Hayes confirmed that 2 independent tests had been conducted, both siblings immediately agreed to participate in any additional verification steps needed. After breaking the news, Hayes asked the family to send every old photo, genealogical document, letter or item they still had related to Emma from before. Lauren opened the memory box her father had left behind and pulled out faded photographs: Emma standing next to Sam in front of the house, Emma smiling at a birthday party, Emma hugging a cloth doll. She photographed each one and sent them to Hayes, who added them to the verification file the same day. The images were examined by a forensic anthropologist for morphological comparison against the childhood photos in Helen's suitcase and current photos of Anne. Lauren also sent the Carter family genealogy book, handwritten by Margaret and later updated by Henry, in the hope that Emma might discover connections she had never known. The old pages clearly listed each family member's name, birth date, places lived, and small everyday notes like "Emma likes the color blue," or "Sam always protected his little sister." Reading those lines made even Hayes feel for the first time that the case was stepping out of the boundaries of an investigation and becoming an unfinished family story. To prepare for the reunion, he double-checked every legal data point to ensure no procedural step was missed. Identity confirmation, photo comparison, scar description, height, estimated date of birth, and cold case cheeks. For the first time in 64 years, the Carter family no longer had to say Emma disappeared. They could prepare to say Emma has been found. With the DNA tests providing absolute confirmation of her identity, the Texas Rangers quickly arranged for Emma to return to Texas, her first time back in the 64 years since she was taken from Denton on a summer morning. Ranger Hayes picked her up at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport and drove her straight to the county office to meet Lauren and Michael, the niece and nephew she had never known existed but who were her closest living blood relatives. The meeting was not staged as a formal ceremony. It took place quietly in a small conference room where the three sat a few meters apart, cautious yet trying to find points of connection. Lauren approached first, carrying the family folder, old photos, Sam's notes, and a few pictures her father never got around to putting in the album. When Lauren opened the first page, there was Emma's face, as a 5-year-old, lightly wavy brown hair, bright eyes, a little bow, images Anna had never seen as an adult. No one cried, there were no sobs, only a heavy silence as Emma faced her past self. Michael handed her a photo of Sam hugging Emma in front of the house and said simply that their father had waited his whole life for this answer. Emma looked at the picture so long that Ranger Hayes gently asked if she needed a break, but she just shook her head and kept going through them one by one, trying to build a bridge between her faint memories and the faces on the paper. Once the basic identity verification through family records was complete, Hayes drove Emma and her niece and nephew to Denton. The town had changed a lot. The dirt roads of the past were now paved. The old Carter wooden house had been remodeled into something completely different, but the lay of the land was still familiar enough for Emma to recognize something. Lauren led her to what used to be the front yard, the spot where Emma and Sam had been drawing with sidewalk chalk on that fateful morning. The yard was now grass, but the wooden gate was still in the exact same place, though replaced with a modern version. Emma stood where the Ford F-100 had once pulled up, where the strange man had walked to the fence, where her life had taken a turn no one could have predicted. She showed no strong outward emotion, only observed carefully, as if trying to lay her memories over the details of the present. At a few moments, she reached out and touched the gatepost, as though searching for some lingering echo of that day. Ranger Hayes then drove the group along the route the perpetrator was believed to have used to flee, based on the reconstructed map in the file. As the car moved along the roads, Emma looked out the window. Certain stretches triggered vague feelings, but no complete memories surfaced. Still, the distance and direction gave her a hard-to-describe sensation, as if her body remembered what her mind no longer held. When they reached the turn where the car might have gone to leave Denton, Emma asked Hayes to stop for a few minutes. She got out, took a deep breath, and simply stood staring down the long road ahead without saying a word. The group then continued to the spot that used to be an empty lot where a witness had seen the vehicle turn around. The area was now a small park, but the slope and wind direction still matched the night. Emma walked slowly along the path, occasionally bending down to look at the ground, as if trying to touch a deeply buried fragment of memory. Lauren and Michael stayed a few steps back, giving her space. They understood that returning here was not about evoking tragedy, but about reclaiming what Emma had never been allowed to know. The afternoon ended with the three returning to downtown Denton, where Ranger Hayes handed them the summary of the identity verification. Emma read every line without visible agitation, only the focused attention of someone finally being placed in the puzzle piece that belonged to her. Though there were no tearful embraces or explosive emotional moments, the reunion unfolded exactly as it needed to. Emma stood before her niece and nephew with her real name, Emma Carter, restored after 64 years, looking again at the place her family had once lived, where her memories had been torn away from her, and quietly accepting that this was the part of her story she had lost, but had now been given back. The meeting did not produce immediate emotional compensation, but it marked the beginning of a journey in which Emma no longer had to rely on scattered case files to know who she was. Emma's return to Texas gave Ranger Hayes and the investigation team the opportunity to expand a critical branch, determining Helen Brooks's role in the night. Previous information about Helen had been fragmented, but when Hayes dug into old Louisiana and Texas records, a surprising detail emerged. Helen had given birth to a baby girl in 1959, but the child died only days later. Hospital records confirmed the event, and the treating doctor noted that Helen suffered a severe psychological crisis after the loss. For Hayes, this was not proof of a crime, but it opened the door to a possible motive. A woman who had just lost a child might cling to the idea of replacing her with another, especially while living in isolation without emotional support. From there, he shifted to checking records of vehicles Helen owned around the time of Emma's abduction. Louisiana registration records showed Helen owned a light blue Ford F-100 from 1950. In later years, she sold the truck and switched to another vehicle, making physical tracing nearly impossible, but the match was strong enough for Hayes to add it to the supplemental investigation file. He also located a 1960 repair invoice showing Helen's F-100 had its ignition system adjusted, consistent with the sputtering engine sound the witness heard the morning Emma disappeared. When cross-referencing Helen's travel patterns in 1960, Hayes discovered she had worked briefly at a textile plant in East Texas, less than 2 hours' drive from Denton. A June 1960 time card showed Helen absent on the exact day Emma vanished, a small but noteworthy detail, as there was no request for leave or supporting documentation. However, a single day's absence was not proof of criminality, and personnel records from that era did not require detailed explanations. Helen's appearance in Louisiana shortly after the abduction also fit the timeline. She left Texas just weeks after the Denton incident, bringing with her a child with no paperwork, then filed a delayed birth certificate, claiming a home birth. Yet Ranger Hayes still faced the crucial question, did Helen actually take Emma herself, or did she receive the child from someone else? Every 1960 witness described a man at the Carter gate, not a woman. Throughout the reconstruction, Hayes always considered the possibility that Helen did not act alone. The witness descriptions showed only a man picking Emma up and driving off, with no sign of a woman at the scene. This led Hayes to two hypotheses. Either Helen had a male accomplice who carried out the abduction and later handed Emma over after leaving Texas, or Helen obtained Emma some other way, but was still indirectly connected to the original perpetrator. With no phone records, no financial documents, and no surviving relatives of Helen to provide further information, every theory remained at the level of probability without supporting evidence. Although the details of motive, vehicle ownership, and travel patterns painted a relatively clear picture, there was still no direct evidence that Helen was solely responsible for the abduction. Ranger Hayes noted in his report that the evidence was sufficient for circumstantial linkage, but falls short of the standard required to conclude criminal conduct. This provisional conclusion kept the file appropriately cautious. Helen emerged as the central figure in Emma's journey out of Texas, but her precise role in the 1960 abduction, mastermind, accomplice, or recipient, remained beyond the reach of verifiable proof. The only certainty was that she had raised Emma for decades, and the suitcase she left behind after her death became the landmark that allowed Emma to discover a truth she had never known in her entire life. Although the analysis of Helen helped complete the picture of Emma's movements after her disappearance, Ranger Hayes still faced a critical roadblock. Every witness from 1960 insisted the person who appeared at the Carter family gate was a man, tall, wearing a baseball cap, not a woman. This detail forced the investigation to expand into the possibility of an accomplice, because nothing directly connected Helen to the Denton crime scene. When Hayes re-examined the original statements, the Denton County Sheriff's reports, and the early composite sketches, the image of this man remained a separate link, unconnected to Helen. There was no information placing her in the area on the morning of the incident. No witness saw a woman with the green F-100, and the vehicle description never mentioned a petite figure like Helen. A new line of analysis emerged. Helen may have entered the story not as the person who took Emma, but as the person who received Emma from that mysterious man. Her prior loss of a child and the timing of her frequent travel between Texas and Louisiana made this hypothesis more plausible than the idea that she carried out the abduction herself. When timelines were compared, Helen's recorded absence on the day Emma vanished was not enough to prove she was in Denton, but it did align with a window in which she could have taken custody of the girl several hours after she had already been removed from the scene. To confirm this, however, Hayes needed to reconstruct the route of the F-100 and the behavior of the unknown man. That was the point where the investigation hit the wall of history. In 1960, no electronic databases existed for traffic records, license plates, vehicle registrations, gas cards, or credit transactions. Gas stations rarely kept receipts, records were lost or no longer accessible. Most repair shops in the area had closed long ago. Many business owners had died, and potential witnesses who might have seen the truck no longer remembered details accurately. Behavioral analysis faced the same obstacles. There was no indication the man committed the crime for financial gain, no clues tied to violence or kidnapping for ransom. The act happened in an extremely short window, targeted a specific little girl, and the perpetrator fled immediately, consistent with a handoff abduction model. One person grabs the child, then transfers her to someone else for raising or transport. If Helen was the receiver, the man was far more likely the initial abductor. Yet everything known about him existed only as a vague description. White male, approximately 35-45, wearing a cap and standard workwear jacket. Features so common they were useless for narrowing suspects down. No matter how tightly Hayes compressed the data to find patterns, every path led to the same conclusion. The data simply wasn't deep enough to trace backward. Shape, license plate, route, even any connection between the man and Helen. None could be linked with verifiable evidence. Even when DNA profiles from regional persons of interest were compared, nothing new emerged, because the pool was too broad and there were no 19. In the final report submitted to the Texas Rangers, Hayes clearly stated the interim conclusion. The 1960 abduction most likely involved two individuals, a man who carried out the act at the scene, and Helen Brooks who received Emma afterward. However, no physical evidence, witness records or surveillance data existed that was sufficient to positively identify the perpetrator or the precise role of each person. The case therefore remained classified as original offender unidentified, even though the victim's identity had been restored after. The investigative conclusions about a possible accomplice and the inability to identify the original perpetrator forced Ranger Hayes and the Texas Rangers Legal Division to conduct a full reevaluation of the legal status of file. Every milestone was reviewed, from the day Emma Carter vanished in 1960 through years of searches, to the discoveries about Helen Brooks, and the DNA results that confirmed Emma's identity. The file was officially updated to a new status: solved, victim found, unsolved offender, meaning the victim had been located and was still alive, but the actual kidnapper could not be identified for prosecution. This is an extremely rare classification, but it fit the nature of a case now more than 6 decades old. When the legal team examined the possibility of criminal prosecution, they immediately hit 2 major barriers. The first was the death of everyone who might have been directly involved, including Helen Brooks and most of the original witnesses. The second and more significant barrier was the complete absence of any physical evidence that still held legal weight. No fingerprints, no fabric fibers, no tire impressions suitable for modern forensic examination, no surveillance images, no documents or financial records proving unusual transactions or travel. Everything that remained fell into the category of indirect circumstantial evidence, insufficient to meet modern prosecutorial standards. Although the file noted the likelihood that Helen received Emma after the abduction, that alone could not form an indictment without physical proof of the act, especially since Helen's death made interrogation, confrontation, or behavioral reconstruction impossible. Likewise, witness descriptions of the man at the Carter gate lacked enough detail to identify him, and tracing anyone from that era was impossible when most were no longer alive. Accordingly, the Denton County District Attorney's Office accepted the Texas Rangers' findings and formally closed all avenues for criminal prosecution while maintaining the designation offender unknown in the crime database. Once the legal assessment was complete, the next step was to resolve Emma's citizenship status, which had existed under a false identity for over 6 decades. Based on direct DNA testing with Carter descendants and a chain of documents authenticated by the Texas Rangers, the state of Texas restored her original identity as Emma Carter, issued a lawful birth certificate, a new social security number, and all related citizenship documents. The 1960 missing person file was also updated to found alive, one of the rarest outcomes in state history. All existing data was merged into a final master file, closing the legal chapter of a 64-year investigation, even though the biggest question, who was the man who took Emma away, remained unanswered. The societal and professional lessons from the Emma Carter case flowed directly into the final step of a journey spanning more than half a century, returning Emma to her true identity, a milestone that her family, the Texas Ranger and the entire justice system regarded as the most important outcome of the entire investigation. Completing the birth certificate, social security number, and legal identity restoration not only gave Emma back the name she lost at age 5, but also restored her place in the Carter family tree, a lineage that had seemed to lose a vital branch since. Once the legal documents were signed and archived, the Carter family records were officially updated, and gaps that had existed across 3 generations were finally filled. For Emma's grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her reappearance meant more than family reunion. It allowed them to close a file that had haunted the family for decades, from Emma's parents and brother Sam, to the children and grandchildren born later. They had all grown up with the story of the little girl snatched from the front yard, and for nearly 64 years that story remained an open wound no one could heal. The way the case was resolved carries meaning far beyond one family. It stands as a textbook example of how cold cases once thought unsolvable can be cracked by DNA genealogy technology, a tool that did not exist at any point during the original investigation. From a simple 23andMe test taken for health reasons, the DNA data matched the Carter family, triggered a cold case alert, brought in the Texas Rangers, and ultimately led to an identity verification process that spanned multiple states. The case has become a concrete illustration that even without living witnesses, physical evidence, or a perpetrator, the truth can still be reconstructed through an entirely different path, the path of genetic data. For the investigative community, the story is often cited as proof that a missing child should never be removed from the active list, simply because decades have passed. Technology can bridge past and present in ways no one could have predicted. Yet even though the file is legally closed and Emma's identity restored, the case's central question remains unanswered. Who was the man who took Emma that June morning? The details about the F-100, witness descriptions, direction of travel, and Helen Brooks's circumstances all point to a logical chain of events, but no single piece of evidence is precise enough to name the perpetrator. After 64 years, the Texas Rangers still list that question in the file under offender unknown. In many cold cases, simply locating the victim is considered miraculous. Here, Emma was not only found, but returned to her real name, real family, and real history. The final step, unmasking the person who caused the abduction, remains in the shadows of the past, where time has erased whatever might have proven it. The Emma Carter case therefore closes in a unique way, a complete journey of reunion, yet a mystery that will live on forever in Texas investigative history. In Emma Carter's 64-year journey, many details feel strikingly close to everyday American life today and offer us very concrete lessons. In 1960, because of one moment of inattention in the front yard, Emma, a 5-year-old girl in suburban Texas, was picked up by a stranger in a green Ford F-100 and vanished. Back then there was no Amber Alert, no doorbell cameras, neighbors rarely suspected strangers, so the family's initial 15-20 minutes of confusion became an unrecoverable gap. Today in America, kids still play in yards, still walk to school, and those same small moments are where danger slips in. The lesson is not to live in fear, but never to underestimate the importance of supervising children, teaching them stranger danger skills, and reacting lightning fast to anything unusual, because the first hour is always the golden hour. Emma's story also shows the power of properly preserving and sharing data. Old handwritten sheriff reports, Ford F-100 registration records, the photo of a little girl with E embroidered inside Helen Brooks' suitcase, combined with DNA from grandchildren, Lauren, Michael, and a 23andMe test Emma took just for health reasons. All of it came together to solve the case, even though the perpetrator remains unknown. This is very relevant to modern American life, where millions use recreational DNA services without realizing they can identify victims, return names to the nameless, or even exonerate the wrongly convicted. Finally, the fact that Emma grew up as Anna Brooke, always feeling out of place because she had no proper birth certificate, a late-issued SSN, and avoided questions about family, reminds us of the value of honesty in family relationships. If you are raising an adopted child or hiding part of the past, silence can leave that child carrying an emptiness for life. The truth can hurt, but as Emma's case shows, only by facing it can a person truly come home to themselves. Thank you for joining me on this 64-year journey to bring Emma Carter back to her true identity. If you'd like to keep exploring cold cases solved by modern technology, please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video, where we'll continue watching the truth be found even when time seemed to have buried it forever.